What he was saying last week is the exact same thing that I was saying. He and I have been on exactly the same page. I saw a headline, I'm defying Trump. I'm not defying President Trump. I've spoken with him at great length, and he is very frustrated about the situation. His great concern is election security, and it is mine as well. It is all of ours. We are really seriously concerned about this, and we got to do everything that we can to ensure it. Congress, we passed the SAVE Act in the summer, and it's been sitting on Chuck Schumer's desk collecting dust. That is maddening to us. He understands fully, President Trump understands the current dilemma and the situation that we're in. We'll continue working closely together. I'm not defying President Trump. We're getting our job done, and I think he understands that. So thank y'all. Appreciate the time.
Okay, so imagine you're watching Congress on C-SPAN, just another day of legislative business, debates over bills, procedural votes, the usual stuff. And then suddenly, a Democratic member stands up and directly accuses the Speaker of the House of corruption, not in some vague political attack, but specific accusations about shielding Trump, about ignoring ethics violations, about using his position to protect corrupt conduct. In the chamber erupts, Republicans shouting back, Democrats demanding investigations, the Speaker trying to maintain order while defending himself, reporters scrambling to capture every moment, in America watching as one of the most powerful positions in government gets accused of corruption in real time on live television. That's what happened on November 12, 2025. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, facing direct corruption accusations during a live congressional session. And the fallout is massive because you can't just accuse the Speaker of corruption without consequences. Either the accusations stick and Johnson faces investigations and potential removal, or the accusations are proven false and the accusers face backlash. But either way, this is chaos. This is the House of Representatives in complete disarray. This is American government dysfunction on full display. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
In mere moments, I want you to watch the board. They're going to do it again. I'm going to guess for you that most of our Democrat colleagues are going to vote again to close the government, again to take food out of the mouths of families that need it, again to deny pay to federal employees, again to stall flights and cancel airlines and do all the rest that they've done. But we are not going to let them succeed in that gambit. And that's right.
The accusations center on Johnson's relationship with Trump, his defense of Trump's conduct, his refusal to use congressional oversight to investigate obvious conflicts of interest and potential corruption. And Democrats have been building this case for months, have been documenting instances where Johnson protected Trump, where he blocked investigations, where he dismissed ethics concerns, where he used his position as Speaker to shield the president from congressional accountability. And on November 12th, they decided to go public, to make the accusations on the House floor, where they're part of the congressional record, where they can't be ignored or dismissed, where they force a response. And Johnson's response was revealing, defensive, dismissive, and in some ways, confirming exactly what Democrats were alleging, because instead of promising investigations or transparency, Johnson defended Trump's conduct, said whatever Trump is doing is transparent, said there's no attempt to hide it, as if transparency makes corruption acceptable, as if openly engaging in conflicts of interest is somehow better than trying to hide them. Johnson's quote about Trump's transparency is particularly damaging. He said, and this is reportedly a direct quote, "Whatever President Trump is doing is transparent. There's no attempt to hide it." And he meant that as a defense, meant it to suggest that if Trump is doing things openly, they can't be corrupt. But that's absurd. Corruption is corruption, whether it's hidden or open. Taking bribes is still illegal, whether you hide the money or openly deposit it. Using public office for private gain is still wrong, whether you do it secretly or announce it. And Johnson's inability to understand that, his willingness to defend Trump's conduct simply because it's transparent, that shows either profound ethical confusion or deliberate complicity. Shows Johnson either doesn't understand what corruption is or is choosing to enable it. And either option is disqualifying for someone in his position. The George Santos situation is being used as evidence. Santos was expelled from the House after ethics violations, after lying about his background, after financial improprieties. And Johnson was involved in that decision, was part of the leadership that decided Santos had to go. But Democrats are asking why the same standards aren't being applied to Trump, why Santos gets expelled for relatively minor violations, while Trump faces no consequences for far more serious corruption. while Johnson enforces ethics rules against junior members, but not against the president. And that double standard, that selective application of ethical standards, that's what Democrats are calling corruption, are saying Johnson is using his position to protect Trump while throwing others under the bus, and that's abuse of power. That's using the speaker position for partisan protection rather than institutional integrity. Marjorie Taylor Greene complicates the picture. She's been attacking Johnson from the right, claiming he's not loyal enough to Trump, not doing enough to protect MAGA priorities, and Johnson has been trying to manage that criticism, trying to satisfy both traditional conservatives who care about institutional norms and MAGA extremists who want absolute loyalty to Trump. And he's failing. Can't satisfy both groups, can't be institutionalists and Trump loyalists simultaneously. And his attempts to thread that needle are making him look weak, making him look like he stands for nothing, making him vulnerable to attacks from both sides. And now Democrats are piling on, are seeing Johnson's weakness and exploiting it, are making corruption accusations that Johnson can't effectively refute because his own statements support them. Ranking member Garcia's statement was particularly pointed, called Trump the most corrupt person to ever be president, and tied Johnson directly to that corruption. Said Johnson's defense of Trump makes him complicit, makes him part of the corruption. And that connection, that direct link between Trump's conduct and Johnson's enabling, that's the core of the corruption accusation. Not that Johnson is personally taking bribes or enriching himself, but that he's using his position to protect corruption, to shield corrupt conduct from oversight, to prevent accountability. And that's a form of corruption too, is abuse of power, is violation of his oath to uphold the Constitution. And Democrats are demanding investigations, are calling for the House Ethics Committee to review Johnson's conduct, are threatening to make this a defining issue going into 2026. Johnson's defense has been that his job is managing the House, not policing executive ethics, that congressional oversight is complicated, that he can't investigate every allegation. But that defense rings hollow when the allegations involve the president, when the corruption is obvious, when Johnson is actively defending the conduct rather than just declining to investigate. Because there's a difference between not investigating and actively enabling, between staying neutral and taking Trump's side. And Johnson has clearly taken Trump's side, has defended conduct that's indefensible, has made statements that make him look complicit, and Democrats are seizing on that, are making Johnson's corruption a major issue, are trying to tie every Republican to Johnson's enabling of Trump. So buckle up, because we're about to break down exactly what Johnson is accused of and why these accusations are creating absolute chaos in Congress. All right, let's dig into the specific accusations against Mike Johnson, because the details matter, the pattern of conduct matters, and understanding what Johnson has actually done versus what he's accused of doing, that's essential for evaluating whether these corruption charges have merit. So we start with Johnson's role as Speaker. The Speaker has significant power, controls what bills come to the floor, decides what committees investigate, influences how House resources are allocated, and can use that power to protect or expose corruption, can facilitate oversight or block it. And Democrats are arguing Johnson has consistently used his power to protect Trump and other Republicans from accountability, has blocked investigations, has prevented votes on oversight measures, has used procedural tools to shield corrupt conduct from scrutiny. And that pattern, that consistent use of Speaker power to enable rather than check corruption, that's what Democrats are calling corruption itself. The Santos comparison is telling. George Santos lied extensively about his background, about his education, his work history, his family, and when those lies were exposed, when ethics investigations confirmed he violated rules, House leadership moved to expel him, and Johnson supported that, voted for expulsion, said Santos's conduct was incompatible with serving in Congress. But Trump has also lied extensively, has made false statements about his business, about his wealth, about his dealings with foreign governments, and Johnson hasn't demanded accountability, hasn't called for investigations, hasn't suggested Trump's conduct is incompatible with the presidency. And that double standard is glaring. Suggests ethics rules only apply to people who aren't politically powerful. Suggests Johnson will enforce standards against junior members but not against the president. And that selective enforcement is itself corrupt, is abuse of power, is using institutional authority for partisan protection. Johnson's statements defending Trump's business dealings are particularly problematic. Trump has maintained ownership of his businesses while president has refused to fully divest or create genuine blind trust, has properties that do business with foreign governments, has conflicts of interest that raise obvious corruption concerns, and Johnson's defense has been that because Trump is transparent about this, it's not corruption. That because everyone knows Trump still owns his businesses, there's no ethical problem. But transparency doesn't eliminate conflicts of interest, doesn't make it acceptable for presidents to profit from their position, doesn't excuse conduct that violates ethical norms, and Johnson's failure to understand that, or his willingness to pretend he doesn't understand it, That's deeply troubling. That's a speaker using his position to normalize corruption rather than to check it. The shutdown crisis provided specific examples. During recent government shutdown negotiations, Trump administration officials reportedly communicated with businesses about how shutdown would affect their contracts, about how they might be able to profit from shutdown chaos. And those communications raised ethics questions, raised concerns about officials using their positions for private gain, and Democrats wanted investigations, wanted the House to use its oversight authority to examine what happened, and Johnson blocked it, said investigations would be premature, said they needed to focus on reopening government rather than on ethics investigations. But that prioritization was itself a choice, was deciding that protecting Trump mattered more than investigating corruption. And Democrats are arguing that choice was corrupt. Was Johnson using his power to shield misconduct? The Trump business activities go beyond just maintaining ownership. There are allegations of foreign governments booking Trump properties to curry favor, of administration officials steering contracts to Trump-affiliated companies, of the Trump organization benefiting financially from Trump's presidency in ways that are unprecedented, and all of that deserves investigation, deserves congressional oversight. But Johnson has blocked it, has prevented committees from issuing subpoenas, has refused to allow floor votes on oversight resolutions, has used every tool available to him as Speaker to prevent accountability, and that obstruction, that systematic blocking of oversight, that's what Democrats are calling corruption, are saying Johnson is complicit in Trump's corruption because he's preventing it from being investigated and exposed. The Ethics Committee question is crucial. The House Ethics Committee is supposed to investigate misconduct by members, is supposed to enforce rules, but the committee only acts when referred cases by leadership or when complaints are filed, and Johnson has influence over what the committee investigates, can encourage or discourage inquiries, can provide resources or withhold them. And Democrats are arguing Johnson has used that influence to protect Republicans and target Democrats, has allowed ethics investigations of Democrats to proceed while blocking similar investigations of Republicans. And if true, that's corruption. That's using institutional power for partisan purposes. That's violating the trust of the office. Johnson's relationship with Green is complicating his position. Green has been one of the most controversial members, has made statements that many consider racist or conspiratorial, has associated with extremist groups, has engaged in behavior that arguably violates House rules. But Johnson has protected her, has refused to strip her of committee assignments, has declined to pursue ethics investigations, apparently because he needs her political support, needs MAGA loyalists to back him as Speaker. And that protection, that decision to shield problematic conduct for political reasons, that's exactly what Democrats are calling corruption, are saying Johnson is putting his political survival ahead of institutional integrity. But at the same time, Green is attacking Johnson from the right, is saying he's not doing enough for MAGA, not protecting Trump aggressively enough, not fighting Democrats hard enough. And Johnson is caught, can't satisfy Green without alienating moderates, can't satisfy moderates without alienating Green, and his attempts to navigate that are making him look weak and unprincipled, making him look like he has no core beliefs beyond political survival. And that weakness is making him vulnerable to corruption accusations. Because if Johnson stands for nothing except staying Speaker, then of course he'll enable corruption if it helps him stay in power. That's the logical conclusion of pure political opportunism. The transparency argument Johnson made is worth examining more closely, because there's a kernel of truth to it. Trump has been unusually open about maintaining his business interests, about refusing to fully divest, about not caring about traditional ethics rules. He hasn't hidden those things. But transparency doesn't equal ethics. A president openly violating norms is still violating norms. Being transparent about conflicts of interest doesn't eliminate the conflicts. And Johnson conflating transparency with ethics, that suggests either confusion or deliberate obfuscation. Either he genuinely doesn't understand the difference, or he's deliberately confusing them to provide cover for Trump, and neither possibility is good. Either the Speaker is confused about basic ethics, or he's deliberately enabling corruption. Democrats calling for investigations of Johnson himself is significant, because if the Speaker is under ethics investigation, that's unprecedented in recent history. That's a direct challenge to his authority. That makes it difficult for him to function. Because how can he lead the House while being investigated by the House? How can he oversee ethics while his own ethics are questioned? And that's exactly Democrats' goal, to make Johnson's position untenable, to force him either to change his conduct or to resign, to make it impossible for him to continue enabling Trump without consequences. And that strategy might work, because Johnson's hold on the speakership is tenuous. He doesn't have unanimous Republican support. And if corruption investigations add to his problems, if they give moderate Republicans reason to question his leadership, he might not survive. The 2026 implications are enormous, because if Johnson is viewed as corrupt, if he's associated with enabling Trump's corruption, That hurts Republicans electorally, makes it easier for Democrats to run against GOP corruption, makes the entire Republican caucus vulnerable, and some Republicans understand this, understand that Johnson's conduct is creating political liability, and might be willing to force leadership changes to minimize damage, might decide that protecting Johnson isn't worth losing their majorities, and that possibility, that Republicans might turn on Johnson to save themselves, that's what makes his position so precarious. The immediate aftermath of the accusations was chaotic. According to reports, the House floor descended into shouting matches, members violating decorum, accusations flying back and forth, and Johnson trying to restore order while simultaneously defending himself. And that chaos itself is significant, because the House is supposed to be governed by rules, by procedures, by norms that maintain order even during disagreements. And when those break down, when the chamber erupts in chaos, that shows the institution is under stress, shows that partisan warfare has reached a point where normal functioning is impossible, and that breakdown is itself a crisis, is evidence that American democracy is struggling. So let's break down what these corruption accusations against Mike Johnson mean, why they matter, what the implications are for Johnson, for the House, for Republican Party, for American democracy. Because this isn't just partisan sniping. These are serious allegations about how the speaker is using his power, and the answers to questions about Johnson's conduct will shape how we understand this period and how Congress functions going forward. First, the enabling corruption question, Johnson's defense of Trump, his blocking of investigations, his refusal to allow oversight, all of that amounts to enabling corruption. Even if Johnson isn't personally profiting, even if he isn't taking bribes, he's using his position to protect corrupt conduct, and that's itself a form of corruption, is abuse of power, is violation of his constitutional oath, and Democrats are right to call it out, right to demand accountability, right to make this a central issue, because a speaker who enables corruption rather than checking it, that's a speaker who's failing in his fundamental duties, who's betraying the institution he's supposed to lead, and that betrayal deserves consequences. Second, the double standards. Johnson expels Santos for ethics violations but protects Trump despite far worse conduct. That inconsistency reveals that ethics enforcement is political, is based on power rather than principle, and that undermines the entire ethics system, makes people cynical about whether rules matter, makes voters think everyone in Washington is corrupt because enforcement is so selective, and that cynicism corrodes democracy, makes people disengage, makes them think their votes don't matter because everyone is corrupt anyway. So Johnson's double standards don't just hurt him, they hurt the entire political system. They damage public faith in government. They contribute to the erosion of democratic norms and institutions, and repairing that damage is going to take years, is going to require consistent principled ethics enforcement that shows rules apply to everyone, regardless of power or party. Third, Johnson's political weakness. He's caught between MAGA extremists and traditional conservatives. Can't satisfy both, can't maintain his speakership without both groups. And that weakness makes him vulnerable, makes him unable to resist corruption accusations effectively, because he can't take principled stands without losing support, can't enforce ethics without alienating allies, so he's trapped. And Democrats are exploiting that trap, are pushing on his vulnerabilities, are making his position increasingly untenable, and Johnson has no good options. If he moves toward traditional conservatives, he loses MAGA support and possibly his speakership. If he moves toward MAGA, he alienates moderates and faces more corruption accusations. And staying where he is means taking fire from both sides, means looking weak and unprincipled, means being unable to lead effectively. So Johnson is in an impossible position, and his attempts to navigate it are failing, are making him look worse rather than better. Fourth, what investigations would reveal. If House Ethics Committee or other bodies investigate Johnson's conduct, they'll examine his decisions as Speaker, his use of power, his protection of Trump, and they might find evidence of explicit deals, of Johnson agreeing to block investigations in exchange for political support, of coordination with Trump's team, of specific instances where Johnson used Speaker powers corruptly, and if that evidence exists, if investigations reveal explicit corruption, Johnson's career is over, he'd have to resign, might face legal consequences, might even face criminal charges if the conduct was egregious enough. So Johnson has strong incentive to block investigations, to prevent scrutiny, to use his power as Speaker to protect himself, and that resistance itself looks guilty, makes people think he has something to hide, makes the corruption accusations more credible. Fifth, Republican responses matter. If Republicans defend Johnson, if they attack Democrats for making corruption accusations, they tie themselves to Johnson's conduct, make themselves vulnerable to same accusations, make it easier for Democrats to run against GOP corruption generally. But if Republicans abandon Johnson, if they acknowledge problems and demand changes, they might minimize damage, might show voters they care about ethics, might position themselves as the adults in the room who are willing to police their own. But abandoning Johnson creates leadership chaos, creates uncertainty about who leads, creates opportunity for MAGA extremists to take control, creates the possibility of a speaker who's even more willing to enable Trump. So Republicans are in difficult position regardless of how they respond. Every option has significant downsides, and they're paralyzed by that, unable to make decisive moves because all moves carry risks. 6. The 2026 factor. These corruption accusations will be campaign issues. Democrats will run ads about Johnson protecting Trump's corruption, about double standards in ethics enforcement, about Republicans prioritizing party over accountability, and those messages will resonate, will convince swing voters, will motivate Democratic base, and will cost Republican seats. So Johnson's conduct isn't just damaging him, it's damaging the entire party, creating electoral liability that affects every Republican member, and Republicans need to decide whether protecting Johnson is worth those electoral costs, whether loyalty to one person matters more than maintaining their majority, and some Republicans are already concluding it doesn't, are already thinking about how to distance themselves from Johnson, how to show voters they're different, how to survive even if Johnson doesn't. 7th, precedent questions. If Johnson survives despite corruption accusations, that sets precedent. Says speakers can enable corruption without consequences, can use their power to protect allies, can selectively enforce ethics, can prioritize partisan loyalty over institutional integrity. And that precedent would be terrible for democracy, would encourage future corruption, would undermine faith in government, would establish that powerful positions come with immunity from accountability. So stopping Johnson matters beyond just this instance, matters for establishing that abuse of power has consequences, that speakers can't act with impunity, that Congress will police itself when necessary, and establishing that precedent is crucial, is essential for maintaining any semblance of ethical governance, for showing that democracy can self-correct, for demonstrating that accountability is possible even when it's politically difficult. 8th, what happens next? Democrats will keep pushing, will file ethics complaints, will demand investigations, will make corruption accusations repeatedly, will use every procedural tool available to force accountability. The Republicans will have to respond, will have to either defend Johnson or abandon him, will have to take positions that will define them electorally, and that choice will define Republican Party, will show whether they care about ethics or only about power, will reveal whether they're willing to enforce standards or whether partisan loyalty trumps everything. And voters will judge accordingly, will watch how Republicans handle this, will decide whether Republicans deserve their support based on how they respond to obvious corruption. So Republicans' choices in coming weeks matter enormously, shape not just Johnson's fate, but their own electoral prospects. 9th, Johnson's survival chances. He's in serious trouble, faces attacks from left and right, has weak political position, has made statements that support corruption accusations, has demonstrated inability to satisfy either wing of his party, and might not survive, might be forced to resign under pressure, or might lose a vote of confidence, or might face such sustained attacks that he becomes ineffective even if he keeps the title. And if he goes, GOP faces leadership chaos, faces fight over who replaces him, faces possibility of MAGA extremists taking control, faces weeks or months of internal warfare that prevents House from functioning. So Johnson's fate matters enormously for House function in Republican direction, and the outcome is uncertain. Could go either way, depending on how members calculate their interests. 10th, the institutional damage. Beyond just Johnson, beyond just this controversy, these corruption accusations damage the House as an institution, damage public perception of Congress, damage faith in democratic governance. Because when the Speaker faces corruption accusations, when the House erupts in chaos, when ethics enforcement is obviously partisan, people lose faith, think Congress is broken, think everyone in Washington is corrupt, think democracy doesn't work. And that loss of faith is dangerous, corrodes the foundations of self-governance, makes people susceptible to authoritarian appeals, makes them think strong leaders who ignore rules are preferable to democratic processes that seem corrupt. So repairing this damage matters for preserving democracy, matters for maintaining public faith in institutions, and that repair requires accountability, requires showing that corruption accusations are taken seriously, that investigations happen, that consequences follow misconduct. Without that accountability, without those consequences, the institutional damage becomes permanent. The bottom line is this: Mike Johnson facing live corruption accusations is a watershed moment, shows how far American democracy has deteriorated, shows how partisan warfare has consumed Congress, shows how ethics have been subordinated to political loyalty. And the resolution of these accusations, how Congress handles them, whether Johnson faces consequences, all of that will determine whether democratic accountability still functions, whether institutions can self-correct, whether America can pull back from the brink. This is a test of whether Congress still works, whether ethics still matter, whether power still has limits, and how Congress responds to this test. That's going to shape American democracy for years to come. We'll be watching every development, every investigation, every Republican decision about whether to defend or abandon Johnson, every sign of whether accountability is still possible, because this matters. This is about more than one speaker. This is about whether democracy can survive when one party prioritizes power over principle, whether institutions can check abuse when partisan loyalty demands protection, whether America still has the capacity for self-governance. Stay tuned, because the answers to those questions are being written right now, and they'll define this era of American history.